Well, it is 12:02, so I guess we will go ahead and get started. Um, First of all, thank you all for attending. Sorry, I'm pulling up my notes here. Um, well, first of all, my name is Nick Hevranick, for those of you who don't know me. I am the Engagement Strategies Coordinator for University Libraries here at Ball State. And as I mentioned, this event is being recorded and it will be uploaded to the University Library's YouTube channel, where we have a playlist of all past events. Um, and this, the virtual Lunch and Learn series in general is they're held on the third Thursday of every month during the academic year, barring like holidays and whatnot, finals weeks. And they're just brief online programs highlighting this year graduate student research and projects. So these programs are always free and open to the public. So if you know somebody who would be interested in one of the upcoming events, feel free to share that registration link with them. They do not need to be affiliated with Ball State in any way to attend these events. So the more the merrier. Um, but this event in particular is the Save As an Interactive Web Application for Emerging Games Media event, where Ball State graduate student Blake Chapman will discuss his research into the complexities and complications of modern digital news publishing as it applies to independent games journalism or content creation. He will also discuss how this research led to the creation of an interactive mid-fidelity digital prototype for recommending emerging or alternative sources for gaming news and critique. Um, and a little bit about our guest speaker. Blake Chapman is a first-year graduate student in English with a concentration in creative writing. He is also an alum of Ball State University, having graduated in 2022 with a bachelor's in journalism and media, as well as a recent master's in emerging media design and development. The very graduate program that spawned the research that you're about to encounter. Blake is originally from southeastern Indiana, growing up just outside of Aurora and Lawrenceburg. Although he is technically a Hoosier, Blake considers himself a child of Cincinnati and the Ohio River Valley. Much of his extended family still lives in and around northern Kentucky, so if you ran into him on campus, he'd be more than willing to give you the best recommendations for places to see and eat in the city, or give you his 2 cents about how the Bengals or FC Cincinnati have been playing recently. As an undergraduate, Blake contributed to several on-campus student media organizations, including Byte BSU, WCRD, The Daily News, and NewsLink Indiana. You might also have heard his voice on Indiana Public Radio as an on-air producer or seen him on Ball State PBS hosting Cardinal Compass. Blake's career aspirations still lie in the public media sphere and its potential to illuminate and educate citizens on the lives of artists and creatives in accessible, intimate, and vulnerable ways. Blake's graduate creative project, Save As, an interactive web tool for games media discoverability, is the culmination of an almost lifelong fascination and appreciation for games journalism. With this work, Blake hopes to solve an issue that is becoming more complex to parse as the internet advances and legacy editorial games journalism becomes an increasingly unsustainable practice. Just how do we discover independent or alternative perspectives on games? Through a quantitative and qualitative research process and several rounds of iterative design, he hopes that this mid-fidelity prototype can lead us to a brighter tomorrow for all digital writers, editors, and artists, as well as anyone who sees video games as more than just mere tech commodities. And with that, I will hand things off to Blake.
All right. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that introduction. Again, everyone, I am Blake Chapman. I'm a current graduate student in the English department here at Ball State, and this project stood for my creative project defense in emerging media design and development in the College of Communication, Information, and Technology. And before we get started, I also want to thank my original committee that approved this project, Professors Talby Jackson, Tong Lee, and Josh Fisher, who without their guidance, I would be nowhere near to the point that I got with this project. Um, and just for clarity, I have my notes on like another screen, so I might be looking back and forth from the camera, but we'll get right into it. So I first want to start with a little bit on Game Informer. For those that are unfamiliar, Game Informer is a monthly magazine of gaming news and features that talks about the games industry and other issues. This publication was foundational to not only my childhood and my young adult life, but really my understanding of games as a community and a greater critical art form. It also set me on the path that I am today in terms of discussing games as something more than commodities, but as artistic tools of expression so that we can better understand not just ourselves, but our wider world. The thing is, as I've gotten older, like many people, I've found that I have less time and energy to pursue some of my interests. Furthermore, when it comes to reading more about games and games media, it's no longer just one publication. As I began to learn more about the internet into my later teenage years, I've found that there's several different places to read about news and features, whether it's GameSpot, IGN, Polygon, PC Gamer, Eurogamer, and all of the different independent sources out there. This caused a lot of choice paralysis for not just myself, but I would imagine a lot of other people my age. And as I've matured in my age, my tastes have also matured in how I see games and how I want to read about games. Unfortunately, I've found that there's no real clear way to cut through that noise to find and read a publication or interact and engage with an outlet that I really feel proud of. So today's presentation is going to comprise an introduction on the professional problem space, what the challenges for established games journalism are, and how some independent sources are trying to rectify that. Then I'm going to move into an explanation of the applied research that I did on games media discovery, trying to figure out how audiences are finding content and what editors or writers are professionally doing to stand out against the greater sort of media sphere. And then finally, I'm going to offer a demonstration of the user-centered solution that I came up with, which is an interactive tool to filter and recommend outlets that align with audience tastes. So first, let's start with the problem space. So one of the first, and I broke this down into a couple core areas. One of the first large parts of this problem space is the current editorial focus of mainstream games journalism, media, and journalists. Established games journalists, by and large, are facing multiple problems. According to Big Games Machine's Passion Under Pressure 2024 Games Journalist Survey, journalists currently working full time in the field are both facing less time to pursue quality stories, as well as having to seek a much heavier focus on search engine optimized content. On top of that, this has caused a lot of professionals to grow more anxious about the viability of the career and the field as a whole. And according to that same survey, at least 40% of respondents feel at least slightly negative about the future of the field. As I kind of hinted to, job instability is another major factor when it comes to the problems we're seeing in mainstream games journalism right now. The mere existence of quality reporter or writing positions is at risk. Many, according to Stanton and Johnson 2024, many currently working in games media also have to balance multiple freelance jobs along with their full-time career positions to get by. And if they're not trying to do that, their next best option is to risk going totally independent and seeking out their own stories and kind of huffing it on their own without some sort of key place to keep them stable. On top of that, there have been a lot of publication closures and corporate consolidation over the last few years to the point where it's kind of become a yearly occurrence at this point. High profile closures at Vice with their gaming vertical Waypoint, which they're trying to get to come back, but with a completely new crew of people. The Washington Post, which got rid of their gaming vertical launcher, among other closures like Comcast owned G4 and Kotaku Australia, have come at the same time as digital publishing corporations like Ziff Davis, the owner of IGN, the largest gaming publication on the internet, as well as Fandom, owner of GameSpot, the second largest gaming publication on the internet, have continued to buy outlets. Just in the last year alone, Ziff Davis has purchased CNET, Rock Paper Shotgun, and Eurogamer. And this kind of represents this almost pooling of sources into one kind of corporatized space. Furthermore, there's a lot of influencer competition. The growth of the social internet and content creation has had a significant knockback effect on the viability of mainstream games journalism. The proliferation of online streamers and influencer culture oftentimes exists without the editorial standards and practices of official publications. And also, according to Stanton and Johnson 2024, this is a more enticing avenue for developers and publishers as access points to gaming audiences, and they're more willing to offer some of these streamers or content creators, these individuals that you might recognize on screen, they're more willing to offer them access, exclusive products, or other incentives, such as early review copies or tickets to a typical press event. And Winky 2023 estimates that without said exclusivity toward review copies or pre-release items, a group of these content creators achieves the same purpose as IGN or similar official outlets for many gamers. It's not all bad, though. In the last several years, there's also been a tremendous growth of the independent gaming press. Several publications have opened in just the last few years as a result of layoffs from prominent mainstream publications, such as MinMax, with some of the crew coming in from Game Informer, Aftermath, and Second Wind. These channels and these publications are set out to fill in the gaps of investigative pieces and human interest stories that you might not see at larger publications, and they're primarily sustained by memberships or donations to maintain their editorial independence. The one issue here that Solar 2014 notes is currently these grassroots producers have little possibility to influence the entire field without encouraging reporting itself. And what that requires is a greater awareness of critical coverage, further cross collaboration between all of these different silos, and the unfortunate playing by the same rules of search algorithms as their mainstream counterparts. If I'm looking up an article on a recent game that just came out, or a piece of cultural criticism about a movement in like online gaming spaces, Aftermath, because it's an independent blog, is likely going to be pushed to the second or third page of search results on Google once I get through all of the Ziff Davis owned publications, all of the Fandom owned publications. And unfortunately, they have to play the game right now. The solutions that are currently out there are also pretty static. They're few and far between, they're not very interactive, and they're more concentrated on text-based sources with little room for filtering or personalization. So the two examples that I bring up here is Reconnect, which is an aggregator of a couple hundred games writers' feeds to present daily articles or posts through a single searchable database, and Critical Distance, which is a email newsletter service that shares compilations of incisive writing on games on a weekly basis. The trouble with both of these, again, though, is that they're kind of just like blanket feeds. With Reconnect, you're not going to get a lot of interactivity when it comes to, oh, I really prefer watching video news or listening to podcasts. It's just You get either the most popular stuff, you can get the latest stuff, or you can look at featured things. And then you can go look through the whole blog list to try and find something that interests you. And then with critical distance, it again is primarily focused on text-based sources, and it's a little bit more curated, but not in the user curation sort of sense. So with all that in mind, I then went forward into my applied research. I'm going to take a water break here. So my applied research went through four different major phases. I first began with a competitive analysis where I traced product features, marketing, and unique selling points of five mainstream publications and five of the top alternative publications. And this was to draw initial design insights or a style guide to work off of for that final tool. Then I conducted a series of audience surveys where I sought to figure out how users discover news sources and their overall consumption habits of gaming news. This was done to construct personas to address and cite throughout the design process. Then I went into a semi-structured professional interview stage where I spoke with 8 different professionals in the independent games media space to figure out their difficulties in promoting and distributing their independent work. I did this to pull further design insights to figure out what could be done to best display their work and what makes them different. And then finally, I set up a curation methodology where I figured out a way to select, sort, and score publications to build a final first draft repository for the tool. Because I didn't have, as a graduate student at the time, only having 1 year to pursue this creative project, I wasn't able, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to fit all of the massive expanse of independent games media in here. And maybe not all of them at this point deserve to be in there. So I wanted to figure out what publications are going to make it into the final draft, which of these are really independent or alternative, and just what really makes a publication alternative in the first place. So first, I'll begin with some observations from the competitive analysis. So for this, I primarily looked at IGN, Polygon, GameRant, GameSpot, and PC Gamer, which are the top 5 most read gaming publications on the internet right now. And some of the design insights that I found here was that they all operate off of a very distinct color and visual style. They have a very almost executive feel to them, particularly Polygon and GameSpot, where if you just showed me a single frame of either of these sites or something that was posted with their visual graphical style, I'd be able to pick it out almost immediately. They also primarily focus on reviews, news, videos, and podcasts as their kind of bread and butter genre fields, and they work off of a more authoritative tone. In particular, PC Gamer, when it comes to like descriptions of product reviews, they really wanted to leave users with this feeling of you're coming here because you know we're professional and you know that the value statement is in how we're presenting the information. And they want that to be an almost like um, parental sort of verbalization of any gaming information you might need. When it comes to the independent field, the 5 sources that I looked at were Second Wind, which is a YouTube channel, SkillUp, which is another independent YouTube channel video program, Aftermath, which is an independent blog, People Make Games, which is a video documentary series, and Hard Drive Mag, which is a satirical online video game magazine, kind of like The Onion, but for video games, if any of you are familiar. 3 of the big design insights that I found from these publications was first a heavy focus on community and transparency. They from Second Wind and People Make Games in particular, they focus a lot on working off of Patreon or Kickstarter or other similar funding models and using those tools to really bring their communities and their viewers into close contact with their work. They want to make sure, like, hey, this is how your money's being spent. This is an example revenue report that I got from Second Wind's Patreon, and really bringing the community into the conversation. They also operate off of a more personable tone for directions or interactions, whether it's titles of videos or scripting. And they want to be more witty and personable to make the news that they are sharing something that, again, feels like, oh, I'm having a conversation with just another peer. And finally, there's a greater emphasis on darker visuals and simplified layouts. Aftermath, in particular, was a great example of really letting the white space on their page sort of sit and not overwhelming the reader with too much visual information or an awful visual hierarchy. Next up was the audience surveys. I modeled these off of the Reuters Institute's digital news report that was published in 2024. And I modified the questions in there to align more with games journalism vocabulary and really focus in on the discovery and consumption habits of gamers when it comes to, or readers of games media. I also focused it on adult news consumers who are over the age of 18 who have ever engaged with games journalism in any capacity. If they've watched a video, if they'd read a news story, if they've, even like, I don't know, followed someone on Twitter or a journalist on Twitter, that would count. I recruited participants through print flyers like you're seeing on the right side, social media forums, and of course the almighty Ball State Comm Center. Some of the insights that I got back that would inform the personas were: first, 34% of respondents access mainstream games journalism at least once a day, and 46% of respondents access independent games journalism at least once a day. So this is for many a daily occurrence, or at the very least a weekly occurrence, that they are going back and they want to read new information, read about what's currently happening. When it came to mainstream outlets, of course, IGN, GameSpot, and Polygon were predictably the most popular. But it's interesting, when it came to alternative outlets that they had accessed in the last week, most respondents said that they didn't access a particular outlet specifically, but rather focus on content creators or single personalities, which I also expected, as I mentioned from the literature review earlier. When it comes to discoverability, social media overwhelmingly was used for discovery and even consumption of news stories, whether that was through their social feeds or their timelines, without necessarily clicking away to read the official story. And then finally, for the devices that they primarily use to access, smartphones, of course, were big, and then followed up pretty closely by laptops and desktop computers. And then the final major piece here was, when it came to what was important and motivated these audiences to interact with games journalism, it was that they want their games media to be entertaining, provide clear consumer advice, learn more about specific topics, and keep them up to date on what's happening in the industry. Their motivations to really engage, and really what gets their attention when it comes to games media, is unique takes or perspectives on games, as well as reviews or wider critique of the gaming space. And one of the interesting points that I want to mention here is that unique takes and perspectives was actually the factor that respondents felt mainstream games media did the worst at. So that was something that I really wanted to hone in and focus on in the eventual design process. So with that in mind, I drafted 3 personas that would inform the design process. I introduce you to Joel, who is a college male, very interested in games media. He interacts primarily through social media on his phone and really enjoys unique and entertaining perspectives on new games. Jade is also a college female, somewhat interested in games media, interacts through independent creators on her phone or her laptop, and really enjoys entertaining retrospectives on unfamiliar games. And finally, we have Cal, who is the one professional male in all of this. Again, very interested in games media, and is most interested in interacting through websites or channels on his phone, and really prefers breaking news and reviews. So when it came to the insights from the interviews, these were kind of various, and I'll get into the graphs later. But first and foremost, external promotion of independent work was not a major concern for a lot of the independent editors that I spoke with. This was primarily because they operated off of smaller budgets, and they understood the dynamics of search algorithms weren't very friendly to them. This was compounded by the seemingly endless production of editorial content that's published online every day in the field. They also found that, with that said, their most reliable tactic were peer-to-peer connections. Community and collaboration were really important to them. Over half the participants of my interviews noted that the perceived rarity of their outlet and the types of stories, tone, or presentation that they employed was a great way for them to stand out against the rest of the pack. And then finally, when I asked them what defines alternative games media, they believed that it was equal parts style and substance, something defined by obsessive niches, entertaining tone, and a consciousness of their work. Furthermore, because of their receptiveness, responsiveness, and personable attitudes, they felt that their audiences like being in their circle and will stay because they're friendly or their audience presence is affirmed in their work. And to show you how this kind of coded out the number of participants that describe similar complications to online publishing, participant 2 noted, quote, "I don't think when you start a new publication that Google is particularly friendly. Some of my stories can get a lot of traction on social media, but that doesn't necessarily mean they'll rank any higher on Google search." And then, of course, in this graph here, we can see high number of participants describe the community and collaboration was the major dynamic for their promotion. Um, Participant 4 noted, quote, "I think the value proposition to people is that they're getting something that feels somehow new or different from the other stuff that exists out there." And participant 2 also said, quote, "I would be more or less happy if things kind of plateaued so long as I wasn't losing people, because what interests me is working out certain writing problems, not growth." And then finally, when it came to markers of alternative games media, of course, writing style was the dominant factor, followed up by visual design and niche subjects. So now we get into curation, and this will be a little bit complicated to explain, but I'm going to do my best to inform some of you that might be unfamiliar. So, for my selection process for publications, I worked off of a starter inventory of, I would say, about 100 publications, channels, podcasts, and whatnot that I had cataloged over the years preceding this project, that I wanted to review under the same criteria, right? I knew that I wanted to do a project like this, so I was already making note of, oh, what are some of the interesting alternative YouTube channels or blogs that I follow that I might want to work into the final tool. I still wanted to go for further accumulation though. So I worked off of No Escape Magazine has a really comprehensive blog roll of all of these different alternative and independent games media publications. I looked through Reconnect's aggregate library as well as different critical distance newsletters to see who was popping up frequently, just so I could come up with 50 new subjects that I then categorized. And it's important to note here that I earmarked outlets that provided unique and entertaining perspectives or were focused more on recommending new games for Joel, coverage of recent events for Cal, and essays or retrospectives on unfamiliar games for Jade. I also did a review of their publishing activity, basically looking through how they were releasing, how much content they were releasing over the last year. I scanned their social media pages for this, if they had one listed online, to ensure I was selecting outlets with the most active publishing schedules to satisfy Joel and Cal's method of locating stories on those platforms. So after I had that list of 150, I categorized them in the repository under their main medium and publishing mechanism. So, are they audio, video, or text? And are they a podcast? Are they a YouTube channel or some other video series? Are they a magazine, a blog, some official publication, what have you? And with that, I put all of these sources into 4 major umbrellas that you'll see in a later graph here: official publications, web blogs, podcasts, and videos. This was to save time, of course, in the evaluation and ranking process. So I took that list of 150 plus sources down to 70 with a regular self-hosted publishing schedule outside of social media or similar platforms such as Substack or Twitter. I wanted this to be something where you could click a link and you go to their official page, and this is like them. It's not hosted through someone else. It's not, on Medium. It's not on Tumblr. It's their own thing. So when it comes to the ranking methodology for the final um, tool, I worked off of the CRAP test, which is pretty popular in library research, but I modified it for the particulars of my project. And I narrowed it down to currency, reach, authority, and credibility. Currency stood as the number of posts that a publication had over a fixed period, which were the 6 months from July to December of 2024. Reach was the estimated amount of monthly web traffic over that same period, which I figured out through SimilarWeb, which is an online analytics platform. Authority is the domain reputability and authenticity. That score is provided in SEMrush, which is another analytics platform that I had access to. And then credibility stood for the inbound link count, which is a number you could also be provided for in SEMrush. And the inbound link count is basically how many other sites are linking to this domain that I'm currently on. And that stood as a statement of credibility that, oh, a lot of other people say, hey, come here, which is like, oh, if more people are saying come here, then it must be more credible. For podcasts and videos, I had to make some adjustments. So for reach, I focused on listeners per episode and monthly video views. For credibility, I swapped that more with influence. Spotify followers for podcasts, and Spotify is the largest streaming platform. And then the YouTube ranking of the gaming category when those channels shifted out, how they shifted out the pile. Authority was not traced for video channels or podcasts, as I couldn't find a metric that matched them through quantitative data. So with that list of 70, I then scored them on currency, reach, authority, and credibility to come up with the upper, middle, and lower thirds or percentiles. And I scored them on a 9, 4, and a 1 position against others within those 4 umbrella categories. I then calculated the sum and kept the top 12 to 13 performers in each category to really say, all right, I have something to work off of here. These are deserving of the first class inclusion. I determined the order of importance of 6 different sorting criteria by recruiting 5 potential users from EMDD and through personal connections. And based on their collective rankings, I determined how much each answer when it came to the filtering questions would score when it came to deciding what publication to eventually recommend. And those 6 sorting criteria were tone, the style the publication writes in, cost, how much money does the user spend to access the content, subject, does the publication focus on reviews, essays, news, etc., coverage, does the outlet primarily cover indie games, AAA games, or a mix of both, frequency, how often they publish content, and size. Are they a more niche or popular outlet based on their viewership numbers? So once again, the implications of this from the competitive analysis, I got a distinct visual style, clear instructions on the personable language. From the audience surveys, I figured out the sources that lean heavy into different perspectives on games culture for Joel and Jade, and figured out any potential descriptions I could use for bias or angles of news for someone like Cal. And then in the semi-structured interviews, I found my basis for sorting questions and a plan for the searchable repository. So now I'm going to explain a little bit about the iteration that I went through in the design process. So I began with hand drawings to figure out logic issues before advancing to more mid-fidelity digital interactive prototypes. And I stuck with the desktop version so that I could scale down to mobile with a solid foundation. The key features that I wanted to include were interactive filtering, so like a match percentage through several questions that define each publication as to what you end user might most likely enjoy. A card collecting form factor where users will receive a set that is kind of exclusive to them and easily link off to the actual site. And then also including a rare challenge selection. I wanted to kind of push people away from their typical media silos with an almost like holographic card. And you'll see examples of that later. But I wanted to do that to challenge users and expand their perspectives. And these are some of the examples of the inspiration I had for each of my personas who will be using this tool across both desktop and mobile. I found that collectible cards, trading cards, served as a solid foundation and offer an object that's unique or unfamiliar. Pokemon cards in particular were kind of my basis for this inspiration because according to their relative ages, all three of my personas likely experienced the trading card game craze of the later 90s and early 2000s. And for all intents and purposes, it's a craze that's still going right now. So they see these collectibles as familiar cultural artifacts. And then I also was inspired by Local Thunk's 2024 game Balatro, which is a card deck builder roguelike with, of course, recent appeal. But the interesting part about this game that I enjoy in its interactivity is it presents a clear progression system through the user journey with the incentive to try again and again and again. It's also its visual aesthetic is pretty scalable to my means. So for that paper prototype, I worked out the visual balance to draft the necessary features and finalize the language. For the question and answer portion, wanted to figure out what were the key things that I needed to ask to filter and what were some of the options I wanted to provide for answers. Then for the early digital versions, which I explored in Figma prototyping software, this was to figure out the system flow, really get down the start to finish operation without confusion, and also experiment with different color combinations and shapes, figuring out if there are any readability concerns. And for the more high fidelity final, as you see on the right, here's where I explored different fonts and iconography to add flavor and fill in the empty space, as well as conditionals for selections. Conditionals were the best way within my means that I found to filter and link to a preliminary choice set of 30 different packs of cards. I also was able to add animations, progress markers, full card art, style changes, and badge additions, as you'll see. And of course, here are some mock-ups for the uh, smartphone version that I wanted to address with each of my personas. So now, hoping that this video auto plays, I'm going to show you, yes, a demonstration of the final tool, and I'll talk you through this. So this is the home screen. Little bit of interaction going on with these cards that you can flip over, and this is all working in Figma. There's a learn more page where you can get introduced to the project, have a legend on the card art, and definitions of all of the iconography that you'll see and all of the text that you'll see. We can go back to the home page. And then after this, we can begin selection. The interface will ask you a question, and then you'll be presented with the options and different cards that you'll add to your hand at the bottom. What sort of tone are you looking for in your game's media? And if you're not sure what that means, you can hover over that little question mark at the bottom and get a definition right in the middle of the process. Then you can move into terms of cost. And of course, these are ordered by like, oh, what's the most important thing that potential users think about when it comes to interacting with new and emerging sources. So interested in news. I really just want to hear more about independent games. And then what sort of scheduling are you interested in? Do you want stuff on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis? And then do you want things that are read by more people or less? And finally, you get to this pack pull, and you get recommended your 3 cards or your 3 different independent publications with that match percentage. And then at the bottom, this is your holographic challenge, which will expand your media diet to different sources. So getting into the final run here, future iterations and limitations that I exercise with this project, I really just want to make it bigger. Right now, it's only 30 selections are available. I'd like to draft more, and I had some issues implementing different plugins within Figma's sort of user interface, audio in particular. I just wasn't able to really implement a lot by the time that the project was due. Furthermore, I'm interested in figuring out a way to find a platform to get this actually online. Currently, it only operates within Figma's interface. I'd also like to implement background scoring code so I don't have to keep making handmade selections. But I'm also not a computer scientist, so that might be have to figure out someone to help me do that. And then finally, user testing and feedback. Within the time frame of the project, I was unable to schedule testing with the final version. So I'd love to do some contextual inquiry with past participants who said they'd be interested, as well as improve the language, coloring, selections, features, and really just understand through those surveys and testing how likely people are to actually use this, and if they're interested in pursuing their selections. And I finally want to end with a discussion about the implications of this research. I feel that first and foremost, this represents a major contribution to games media discovery. Not only does it bring general audiences into closer contact with alternative sources, it also expands the academia on where and how news audiences in general come across sources on the modern web. I also think that this is a pretty clear breakaway from the tech oligarchy that exists in the online searchability space. Valentine 2025 even says key gaming power brokers such as Xbox are already planting the seeds to expand AI assistance into their releases with user consent or not by giving players the option to source where to find certain items or how to complete difficult quests. Unfortunately, this would effectively siphon off, if it's used in wide numbers, the last reliable bit of web traffic that sites such as IGN and Polygon get on a daily basis for their guides, tutorials, and other wiki information. And if that foundation cracks, the house of cards falls for like most of games media because that's the reliable internet traffic that they get. Um, Participant one put this best when they said, quote, Google is like this icon of sin, and we're all just trying to appease it by sacrificing little pieces of our credibility every day into this kind of pyre to try and keep the lights on, end quote. This frustration with search engines, Google in particular, was noted throughout each of my interviews, and their gamble into AI tools like Gemini is another worrying sign for the blogs or outlets already pushed to the second or third page of search results. I also feel fundamentally that something like this puts power back into the hands of the actual writers and reporters, journalists, and editors that make this content sing. Tools like mine, I believe, are becoming increasingly necessary with how the social internet and games industry is evolving or devolving, depending on who you ask, so independent editors can attain and retain loyal audiences. And with that, I open the floor to any questions anyone might have.
I did want to just this isn't really a question, but that last bit about the AI being included into gaming content.
Mm-hmm.
uh, I mean, I think the problem with Googling things is even worse now too, because they have the AI summaries now whenever you
Yes.
search anything, so you don't have to go to any web page anymore, really. I mean, if you believe what the AI is telling you. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that is, yeah, just getting.
Yeah, that was at the time that I finished this project, which was in April. I don't believe Google had launched the AI mode search function yet. But the fact that like that mode and the like AI overview has become so synonymous even now, and we're less than 6, maybe even half a year after that, like this problem is potentially accelerating. This issue is accelerating. And the point I made about like the second and third page of search results, haven't did my own research on it, but I would harbor a guess that if Aftermath and similar blogs are already pushed to the second and third pages because they don't operate off of the same sort of search engine optimized kind of strategies that a place like IGN does, then Gemini is not going to pull from that source list to really come up with an answer, right? It's going to pull from the major players that are already within that first page and a half of results, which could likely be just IGN, Polygon, GameSpot, or more likely, um, all publications that are owned by the same like four games media conglomerates, which again, depending how you slice it, is just as, if not more, concerning.
Any other questions for Blake?
I just say thank you so much for your presentation. I love that you highlighted some library search strategy and information literacy in your presentation. And I think that, beyond the gaming world, there's broad application of what you're doing here in trying to take, a world that's very much saturated with information and trying to connect people with a curated set of resources that best meet their particular needs. And so I can see a lot of ways that this type of infrastructure that you're building could be useful in a lot of different disciplines, particularly within academia. So thank you so much for your work on this.
Yes, of course. I really do. I appreciate that. Um, I didn't even know like the crap test existed before like one of the people on the committee recommended it to me. I was like, hey, you might want to modify this for your own thing. And I think it worked out really well. And it was really fun to kind of go through that. And I think that kind of one of the main motivations with this project, and it relates to your point, Amy, is that a lot of these independent and alternative sources, like they fundamentally don't, and when it comes to games media and internet publication, they don't operate off of the same kind of masthead or like expectations. You read a blog post on Aftermath or another like independent blog, and like I'm spacing out on some of the names right now, but they're not looking for growth. So they're not like fundamentally like they're almost putting their shoulder to the wheel of like, I do not want to play the game of search engine optimization because I know where that leads. Some of these people have worked at publications where they are forced to do that more and they know where it leads. And now they want to create something that is supremely sort of against that way of thinking or that way to do business almost, and really put the power back in the hands of like, we're giving you something more authentic, and we believe it's more authentic because it's not driven by metrics, or it's not driven necessarily by analytics. It's driven by what the writing is or what the content itself is. um so yeah, it's a very interesting sort of space in that regard, and I just wanted to make something that felt more interactive, right? That it wasn't just another database of these sources that I was offering like a stamp of approval on, that it was something that someone could come to and be like, oh, this is fun. And then because it's fun, feel a little bit more encouraged to actually go and explore, you know?
Blake, I have a question. I'm curious. So if you were able to get this online, and I think the tool's cool, I'm curious, wouldn't it fall under the same sort of problem as all the sites you're talking about, that it would just be on the fifth page of Google and no one would be able to find the tool? I'm just curious, sort of, have you thought about how to get your tool or tools like it further up so that people could actually find them?
Yes. This was the very question that someone in the mid, like one of the member committee or one of my committee members had in like the middle of my project defense, was about, how do you kind of push this to people when you have to operate under the same sort of rules or constrict or constraints that these same sites are operating under. And there was a part in my larger like design document that I kind of discussed in the conclusion about over the course of this research project and this design project, that was something I thought about to myself a lot. And of course, like at a certain point, you get so deep into the project that you're like, well, I know that this is a consideration, but I still want to make this thing and figure it out from there. So, with what I've made, the best way that I could come up with it, with a way to kind of spread it around naturally, is potentially offering it to be featured on some of those very same sites and say, hey, maybe this could be a source for cross collaboration, right? You could feature it as a page or an interactable, and someone that's already reading your stuff could expand their understanding or diet, right? It could be something that for some of the more mainstream publications, if they're willing to play ball with me, that it would be something to say, oh, on IGN, we're going to have a page that's dedicated to just this, right? That maybe if there's more inbound links to it, that it'll rise in the search results. That said, there came a point at the very end of doing this where I really intensely sort of thought about maybe, and this was the best way I could phrase it, maybe a problem that has been brought on by further and further technological acceleration is not going to be solved by more technology or digital tools. And I kind of sat at the end in that conclusion in that discussion with maybe what we need more of is, for lack of a better sort of terminology, like digital communes, where we kind of go to a more very like open or decentralized web space where a lot of these alternative publications, build associations that can offer mutual aid to sites, or they can offer, you know, maybe training resources. I think one of the organizations that I mentioned was the Association for Alternative News Media, which has been around for several decades, but there's not an equivalent when it comes to alternative games journalism. I think, if I were to try and restart this project over again, that might be a different direction to take it is, well, what would an alternative association for or an association for alternative games journalism look like? And try drafting like that constitution in a way. But this is a problem that I've thought about a lot. And I think like that first sort of point about yeah, Amy, you mentioned in the chat, like that idea of community is kind of central to this. And right now, I don't feel like there's a centralized sort of place that a lot of these alternative sources are kind of coalescing around. Um, and I think I've thought about it, and that explanation is probably the best one that I've come up with. But there's definitely more. And I think like if I were to pursue this as a professional, trying to create that very association is something that I would be much more interested in. But I do really appreciate your question because it's something I've thought about a lot.
Right. Well, if there are no more questions, I will close out the event. So thank you so much, Blake, for sharing your research with us. And it does really seem like a fun solution to the issue. And I would try it. So
Yay! Well, there's one. If
yeah.
there's one, there's more.
Um, but and thank you everyone for attending. And I just wanted to let everyone know that the next event will be on October 16th and will feature linguistics graduate student Judith Owano, and she'll be talking about her research on Kenyan English and language proficiency. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, thanks again, Blake, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you all.